folks, sorry for the delay in putting up this video review of the final episode of first half of season 7 of Outlander, but frankly I just got so busy and snowed under with work and life stuff that I didn't get round to it for a while. Also, because this is the end of the first half of the season and the next part isn't going to be out until some point next year, I didn't really feel under the gun to finish this, so here you have it, at a slightly more relaxed pace, hopefully with a higher level of production than normal because I'm not in a mad rush. Outlander, as you know, is the time-travelling action romance adventure show set in the late 18th century around the time of the American War of Independence. Episode 708, Turning Points, starts out with Claire finding Jamie lying prostrate on the battlefield. Wait, no, that's not right. Jamie lying on his prostate. Anyway, she finds him lying down, and a pair of randoms are about to cut his throat, and after going through his pockets for loose change. And Claire manages to scare them away by being a bit Claire, and then Jamie makes a few daft comments before she finally takes him back, sews up his bad hand, and then a scene or two later he's miraculously healed and it's time for another big push. But this time, Claire's has decided that war's actually serious, and isn't quite so la-di-da as she was in the previous episode. So Jamie goes off with his Welsh sniper mate, and they're raining down lead on the British, only it turns out that the British commander is Jamie's cousin. And he's a wee bit conflicted about killing his own cousin, so instead he turns round and shoots the hat off a random British soldier, and it happens to be Willie. And then Jamie heroically leads the rout, and after climbing over a wee wall, stands there a bit in slow motion only to realise, oh, they've just won. And it turns out it's all an amicable ceasefire, so Jamie goes off to see his dying cousin, and him and the Bruce share a little bit of Gaelic, and then once Bobby B is dead, Jamie bumps into Willie, and they kinda say hi and gives him a hat. And as luck would have it, this has bought them a trip back to Scotland because the Brits want Bruce's body taken home and buried there, so instead of sending some Brits home with him, they're going to let Jamie, Claire and wee Ian go on some kind of paid holiday for reasons. And wee Ian, though, he's been busy chatting up thy lass, and, he lets her hold on to his Rollo till he gets back, which, could be an issue because then the old dafty arch bug spots her and the dog is all like, I know you buddy, and he's like, oh nice to meet you young lassie, and she's like, I do not suspect a thing. Wonder what's going to happen. Oh, and back in the 1980s, Bree gets told that Jemmy and Horny Foreman went through the stones, so Roger's like, oh no, let's go, and him and Buck head through to get the wee laddie back again. End of episode. So what did I think? Well, as you've probably noticed from that recap, this episode was decidedly Jamie and Claire centric. And mainly that was because this is the Battle of Saratoga Part 2, and was clearly supposed to tie together the events of both last time, with the problem that Willie and Jamie are now on opposite sides of the same shooting war. Now, I will say this for it, there were some really good scenes this week. Heck, even John Bell managed to do some pretty convincing and interesting stuff during his scenes with Izzy. And that was a bit awkward because, I don't know how flirting works in the 1790s, or basically at all for Quakers. To be honest, I'm not even sure much about Quakers. For a moment I thought they were Mormons, but then no, they're not, they're something else. But anyway, it was interesting that her and her brother had a chat about that aspect of it and how she could be excommunicated or something if she marries Ian. So that adds a little bit of depth and understanding to her reticence and worldview about it. Also, fair play to Skelton, Rankin and not McTavish, because that's a very difficult tone to walk between the story of someone who's kidnapped a child and also we have to use the magical time-travelling stones to do a rescue through time. But, they pulled it off, and I think partly that worked because they did it quickly, briefly, to the point, without getting hung up on melodrama, and without getting hung up on over-explaining things. You could say probably that this scene was arguably a little unnecessary, and they probably could have just put it in last week, and gotten it over and done with, but it was still good. I have no real complaints. Also, Sam's deathbed scene with Gus McFadden, that was decent. No complaints. I quite like the fact that they started off speaking Gaelic, and I'm not sure why they switched to English. That felt unnecessary, but, whatever, it's probably easier to have them actually do the scene in English, being that none of these actors really speaks Gaelic. But yeah, also, really nice to see Angus McFadden, he doesn't really get that much to do these days, he did, after Braveheart, you did realise that, yes, it's the guy from Braveheart who played Robert the Bruce. Anyway, Angus McFadden, good actor. It was nice that he was on it, even if he was on it for a little bit. Another thing that was quite good is I quite liked that thing about the Welsh guy having the scars, and essentially we're doing exactly the same backstory as Jamie, and sort of call back to season 1 with the whole going around the pubs and saying, they whipped me and that's why we should fight back harder. And I liked that. It's fine, It's been done before. It's been done on Sharp, interestingly enough. And yeah, it's something that I thought they might have made more of, but they didn't. But I'm afraid that's kind of it for the super positives of this episode, because, being bluntly honest, this week was kind of boring for me. Which is not what you ever want to find yourself saying about both a mid-season finale and an episode that's about a battle, where there's major conflict between family members. And frankly, this was giving me a bad vibe right from the beginning, because see the scene with the wee boy and his mum, and Claire being this angry, vengeful wench? That didn't really work for me, because it kind of came out of nowhere. We didn't have an emotional context, and frankly, this scene, I mean, hell, in a lot of ways, the whole episode was very flat and lacking in the vitality that you really need to make it work. And a lot of that I put down to boring direction, and I mean, the director, Joss Agnew, hasn't done anything particular that I've ever seen that I've noticed. Some episodes of old British soaps and TV shows that aren't anything special. And this is an episode that should have been special. This is an episode you should have pulled in your top director to do. This is where you should have had like Neil Marshall or something like that, or the guy who did the opening episode, who's a proper film director. But the problem I had was that beginning was just flat. Claire came out of nowhere. We didn't know what was going on with her before this moment. We know that she says, oh, I've been looking for Jamie, but we don't. We didn't know Jamie was hurt until the last second of the previous episode, and then this one just starts off with somebody going through his pockets, and then they're like, oh, well, might as well cut his throat. And then Claire appears out of nowhere and is like, I'll stab yous, that's it. Yeah, it didn't work for me. And following that, the ho ho ho, I'm not actually dead Sassenach conversation was kind of trite. Then literally nothing happens for 15 minutes. It's all largely uninteresting conversation that goes nowhere. And then the show goes off on a tangent about some fucking guy. Now, I'm glad that about 3 or 4 scenes later, Claire turns round and explains who this some fucking guy actually was, because I didn't have a clue. And you know, historical information is always interesting in shows, and it was nice to learn about this guy who's a traitor, but it baffled me because this is something that outside of America we just don't know about, or we just don't really care about unless you're actually probably a historian of this thing. It's not a common turn of phrase here, and it's not something that we pick up in a lot of movies and TV shows. So yeah, I mean, I also didn't buy that Claire would be that shocked because she met this Arnold guy. Because she met George Washington. She met the King of France. I mean, yeah, sure. It's interesting for this show to introduce a character like this to make a point about why do people change sides in battle and what does history truly remember us for. And I kind of thought, oh, that's interesting. What if we have to then watch this character for the next few episodes as we slowly see him turn to the dark side, or we slowly build up wondering constantly if something that's happening is going to be the thing that triggers him, or whether he's actually been bad all along.
Oh, my sweet summer child.
But no, this show did an Outlander and told the entire story of this person in 20 minutes because we've clearly got to cram this in, and there's too few episodes and there's never any space to fill it out properly, and the writers just aren't taking their time with this and doing it right. So no, none of this worked for me, especially the whole tearful, I'm annoyed because my boss is taking credit for my work thing. I mean, that felt petty, mean and daft, and what's worse, it added nothing to this episode but minutes. I can only hope that this will mean something later on and Claire's going to have to make a decision that's influenced by meeting a complicated person once, but I seriously doubt that's going to happen. Oh, and the battle stuff itself? I mean, aside from it starting with Jamie shooting an injured man, he literally shoots an injured man dead. That's damn heroic, Jamie. Why not just aim for his pet cat while you're at it? And, you know, the whole shaboodle of him not wanting to shoot his cousin fell a little flat, especially after that. And this mostly because this was just horribly shot. I mean, I made the comment the other week about Sharp managing to do better than this with 1/100th of the budget and half the extras and half the props and materials, and yet this thing looked terrible, looked cheap as chips, and it was kind of ugly. It looked like we've got 20 guys, a fence, a shed, and this bit of wall. Could you shoot it in an afternoon? Yeah, I could, but it'll look like shit though. Okay, cool, just do that then. I mean, that's what this looked like. And it's really weird because I've since listened to the podcast about this where the producer and showrunner says, oh yeah, we actually had to go back and shoot more stuff because we felt the emotional punch wasn't there. It's like, if you went back and looked at this and thought, oh, we need to shoot more stuff because of the emotional punch, honestly, I think you need your head looked, because you need to go back and reshoot this because it looked crap. It looked really boring and really bad. Anyway, that's me. It didn't work for me. And because it didn't work for me, I couldn't have an emotional investment. And honestly, as this show is telling a story by bullet points now. We've had a year pass, apparently, since they arrived, here in Wilmington and got diverted back to the war. That's what they say in dialogue. Claire says, it's been a year since we were supposed to leave for Scotland. And all I can think is, I don't understand why Jamie said yes to extending his commission. It never made sense at the time. It makes less sense now. And now they both seem like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have done that. It's like, of course you shouldn't have done that. It was stupid then. It doesn't make sense now. And it makes everything that the characters do feel weird and contrived. On a completely different note, it sounds really weird when Claire says goose grease.
My goose grease.
Now, again, I could be wrong. This might be a thing from the 1700s or the 1800s. But in the UK, we call it goose fat.
Is goose fat. You can get it in all the supermarkets.
Watch any Nigella Lawson or Jamie Oliver video. They'll say goose fat. So it's weird that the show is constantly having Claire use strange Americanisms. Now, sure, she's supposed to have lived in America for a bit. And she says things like PB&J. Or the fan favourite Jesus H. Roosevelt Christ, which I've said before and I'll say again, just doesn't work the way that Katrina delivers it. It sounds forced every single time. And now, goose grease.
I'll get you some goose grease, Auntie.
Here in the UK, we do occasionally say grease, but we say grease, not grease. Usually, and it's talking about something you put on machinery. And again, this could just be a lack of knowledge on my part, but it made the whole business about the arsehole grease fall a little bit flat for me as well, even though that was already strange.
Arsehole.
Also, I just want to think about this scene. Right, am I supposed to believe that Archbug, who is about 150 years old, is going to wait on his revenge until Ian gets back from Scotland? It seems like that's the way this is pointing. The way that I would imagine this is more likely to go is Ian's going to get back from Scotland, which presumably will be like a year from now or longer, because I mean it's a long ship journey each way, and I presume he's not going to be there for 5 minutes. So by the time he gets back, is the old man Archbug, who could die at any minute, going to honestly just kind of hang around or ingratiate himself with this wee girl and the dog just so that he can just offer right at the second that Ian comes back? I mean, more likely, he gets back and he finds Izzy's skeleton, or that he finds that either Izzy has been fed to Rollo, or maybe Rollo has been fed to Izzy, or, I mean, if we were to get really grim, he comes back to find Izzy wearing Rollo's fur in the midst of giving birth to baby Archbug Jr. I mean, that's a little dark, but I suspect it's just so he can come back and heroically save the day at the last minute, because Outlander. So where does that leave us? Well, at present we've got the super happy crew en route to Scotland to bury a dude, and you hope that they'd actually live their lives happily ever after, far away from the war and not getting involved with any nonsense. But you've also got the Buck Rogers team coming as well, and I'm betting that all of them arriving in Scotland at the same time means that they're all going to meet up. In fact, I'm going to give you my guess as to what I think is going to happen as somebody who hasn't read the books, just based on what we've got. So Ian, Claire and Jamie have come home, they're on their way to Lallybroch, and presumably, I think once they get there, they're going to bump into Roger and Buck, who will probably go there because it's the obvious place to go on the way for supplies and things, but also because of reasons I imagine that they'll end up missing Jemmy and Horny Foreman, who will have already gotten on a ship to America, and they'll have to make chase. Thus, they will have to go back to America again at some point, because it'll be the mad chase for the gold. I presume somewhere on this, Bree's going to end up reading a letter and realising that only she can save them all again, just like she did in Season 4, and probably bring Mandy back with her. Maybe even starting by flying to America first, going through the Ocracoke stones and heading them off at the pass. Honestly, I mean, I'm betting that there will be a scene next episode or some point where Bree reads another letter. Or maybe, God forfend, all of them, because why the fuck wouldn't you do at this point? I mean, I do not understand the concept of these letters. The existence of those letters in that box makes a mockery of this show, because it's meant that Roger and Bree have had right in front of them a literal, complete timeline of the movements and life events of Jamie and Claire that they've refused to read for really silly reasons. I mean, I am glad that at least that the show is going back to Scotland. I do think the show has always been better when it's been set in Scotland, and it means we can get away from this monotonous farmsteading, from the Dr. Quinn medicine woman stuff, and from this half-arsed American War of Independence malarkey that's been so poorly told that even the worst Assassin's Creed game did it better. And hopefully the show will find itself with a good new footing, or at least a far more compelling story that hopefully they can devote most of the runtime to just telling this one story. Because otherwise we're in for another 8 episodes of painful, badly thrown together slog with too much happening, and then whatever the final season's going to bring. But at least we know that the next season is going to be the last one. Anyway, until whatever time in 2024 they decide to put on part 2 of season 7, these have been my grumpy opinions on Outlander. Cheerio!